I think the main message is hope. I think a lot of people arrive here and they're almost hopeless, and there is a way out, and this model works for millions. There's literally millions of people worldwide that are getting sober through the 12-step Minnesota model. Yes, so usually if an individual rings Aiséirí, it can be a family member, it can be a doctor. If it's a self-referral, they ring, they'll speak to Laura or Chantel in the office. They'll set up an assessment with myself. An assessment sounds very formal, but basically it's a chat for an hour, perhaps an hour and a half. We ask the individual to come with a family member or a close person. And I suppose the important bit is families and clients, they're assessing us as well. Like, do I feel safe here? Do I get a good feeling here? Because it's hard to quantify that, isn't it? Explain to them about the day-to-day runnings of the place, the group therapy aspect, the one-to-one. We have an exercise program, we have art therapy. They'll see a psychiatrist when they're here as well, which is important. And of course the family program and how key we view helping families is.
I think when people come to treatment they expect like a hospital type setting, and when they come in and see that it's more of a home, more of a comforting and loving and supportive environment, they're very much taken back by that. And the scenery outside, there's a lot of greenery, we're by the sea. That's a lot of, that calms a lot of people coming in. There's an opportunity to allow them to reflect and to take time away from their busy life or to reflect on where addiction has brought them.
There's lots of similarities with the addictions and then there's differences. I think drugs and alcohol are very much the same. Gambling can have slight differences, I feel. It can be extra shame or a burden on someone maybe here for gambling as maybe someone who's had a drug problem, alcohol problem, they can say, well, I was out of my head when I done this, or I was intoxicated. Whereas a gambler hasn't got that. Although they're not actually physically taking a drug, their behaviour causes a very similar reaction in the body. It's certainly increased in dopamine. So it's similar in that sense, and it's good for someone who's got a gambling issue to understand that. The rise of drugs in recent years, problems are escalating quicker. I suppose a lot of addictions have a lot of similarities, but with all drugs, but particularly cocaine, financial difficulties. That gets people to treatment earlier with debts and problems that way.
Financial debt that people get into of buying drugs, not being able to pay it back, getting more drugs, having to go to great extremes to pay back debts for drugs that they've used. The consequence to the family then, obviously if you're not paying your drugs, that sort of fear of someone coming up to your door, particularly if you have a family at home. And the amount of money that's spent that's not going into the family home, that's misused, it's a huge consequence financially.
So dual diagnosis is basically dual, so maybe two things going on. Our diagnosis of why they're here is addiction. Another diagnosis, the dual piece, can be a mental health issue, comorbid, something going along with it, exacerbated by drugs. So it's kind of part and parcel of our everyday work. It's nearly more unusual if someone doesn't have depression or anxiety alongside their addiction. How it might impact is, I suppose, addiction at its core can be self-medicating. Short term it works, but long term then it backfires with the other behaviours that go with it. So it's trying to help people realise that whether you call it addiction or alcoholism, or whatever you call it, is this drug helping your anxiety? Would it be better just managing it different ways? So that's very commonplace. And I suppose a lot of people struggle with that. They feel, well, maybe if my anxiety went away, I could drink normally again, or take recreational drugs. So we have to try and look at that and help educate them that it's usually lifelong.
I suppose it's only when someone gets clean and sober or they stop gambling that they start to realise the damage that they've not only done to themselves, physically, mentally, spiritually and emotionally, but to their family as well, to their partner, parents, the worry, the fears, mental health, depression, anxiety. There's so many effects that an individual is presented with here in Aiséirí, and we try to provide supports. We work as a kind of like a family unit here with the team and everyone across from the front office all the way to the maintenance.
I suppose we look at treatments 2 years really, so 28 days is only a small piece, so the continuing care post-treatment is very important. Significantly, the more supports you have, the better outcomes really, the more chances someone finding peace and sobriety. So we really try and involve the families for that piece and for themselves, because I suppose families can become very unwell. So that's a key part of our model and our philosophy. Yeah.
We don't just treat the individual coming in with the addiction, whether it's alcohol, drugs or gambling. We treat the individual and the family as well. So during the 28 days, the family partake within the family programme, and that starts to rebuild the bridges that have been broken down by addiction. And that in itself is a huge motivator. There's a huge amount of healing done within the 28 days between the families. And then when they leave, the families are also included within the programme, so it's not just the individual. So you might have spouses going to aftercare together. You might have an individual going to aftercare where their sibling or a parent or a grandparent might go into a concerned persons group. And all that is done as a unit to help the family to be able to recover together. And I think that that is a huge motivator in long-term recovery and giving people the opportunity to be able to stay on track. We also have, I suppose, here in Aiséirí, an opportunity for women and men to get a feel for fellowship meetings. So before they leave the centre and they're heading out to AA or NA meetings, we have meetings on site which they seem to really love and enjoy.
So I think hope is the key piece I'd like to give anyone, and it's really quite a simple pathway really. Honesty is a big part of it. I suppose addiction is in the dark, in shadows, recovery is on the table, let's talk about it in the light. And it's quite a simple pathway, and as I said, millions of people stay on the path, they do well. 2-year recovery programme is sticking to the path, fellowship meetings, and just letting close friends in and family. So hope would be the key message, I think.